My story is really a very simple one. I got into the debate on the war on Iraq for one reason and one reason alone. It was because I believed that a government has no more solemn decision to make than that decision to send our fellow citizens off to kill and to die in our name as citizens. And we as citizens have an obligation to ensure that we understand fully what it is our government is asking our fellow citizens to do before 4,000 have been killed, before 30,000 have been wounded, before $750 billion have been spent, before hundreds of thousands of Iraqis have been killed, wounded, maimed, made internally displaced, or made refugees, not afterwards. And I actually thought that the debate might benefit from my experience. I'd actually been there. The first line of my obituary used to read, "The last American diplomat to confront Saddam Hussein before the first Gulf War." First line of my obituary now reads, "The Mr. Valerie Plame, the husband of the first American spy, have her identity betrayed by her own government." Now, the second part of my story, of course, is what happens when you suggest that your government has twisted the intelligence to fit a political conclusion that's already been made. Thank you. I wrote an article for the New York Times based on my own personal experience, which said that, you know what, the president, somebody put a lie in the president's mouth. People say that all the time. In fact, it's a great country when you can get up every morning and stand out at your front stoop and shout out as loud as you possibly can, the President of the United States, the Vice President of the United States, Secretary of Defense, and Secretary of State are lying sons of bitches, and survive to see the sun go down. I wrote the article because after 6 months of trying to get the administration to acknowledge that they had misled the American people, I was rebuffed at every turn, including in June of 2003 when the Secretary of State, who was then National Security Advisor, Dr. Rice, was on Meet the Press, and in response to a question about Niger uranium said, perhaps somebody in the bowels of the agency knew something about this, but nobody in my circle. The day after my article appeared, the White House acknowledged the 16 words should never have been the State of the Union address. 3 days after that, the Deputy National Security Advisor offered his resignation because, you know what? There were papers in his files which indicated that they did, in fact, know over at the National Security Council that there was nothing to this. In fact, they had known for months that these allegations were bogus, not because of what I had said, but because of what a number of others who had looked into it at the same time had said. In fact, in October of 2002, fully 4 months before the State of the Union address, the Deputy Director of Central Intelligence testified before the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, and he said, in response to a question from Arizona Senator John Kyle, that one of the areas where we believe the British have exaggerated the case beyond where we would take it is on uranium sales from Niger to Iraq, from Africa to Iraq. Within 3 days, as has now come out, the Director of Central Intelligence had spoken to the White House once, for which there is a memorandum of conversation in writing, and had sent them 2 faxes or emails in which he said, I do not want the President to be a witness of fact in this matter because the evidence is weak and we believe the British have exaggerated the case. 3 weeks before the State of the Union address, the National Intelligence Officer circulated a memorandum through the U.S. government of which Dick Cheney is a part, no matter what he might say, depending on the day. And the memorandum said allegations that Niger has sold uranium to Iraq are baseless and should not be used. All this is in the public record now. The White House knew it, and the White House ignored it. And the White House used the 16 words because the White House wanted to make sure that the nation believed that we really had to fear that the smoking gun would come in the form of an Iraqi-generated mushroom cloud. That's what it was all about. Now, my wife was a covert CIA officer. My wife's identity was protected. And it wasn't protected just to be protecting it. It was protected because of the impact of disclosure of her name on our national security might have. Had the vice president's minions, Mr. Libby, Mr. Rove, Mr. Armitage, been speaking to the Russian military attaché, the North Korean ambassador, or the Chinese for the purposes of disclosing the name of a covert CIA officer or the identity of a covert CIA officer, what would you call that? Treason. Why would you call it anything differently just because that information was brokered through somebody who likes to call himself a journalist by the name of Bob Novak? Why would you call it anything different? You wouldn't. You wouldn't. Dick Cheney, Benedict Arnold. What's the difference? Does anybody know the name of the person who put the lie in the president's speech? Just raise your hand if you think you know. Let the record show that in an audience of a couple of hundred people, one person raised his hand. Does anybody not know my wife's name? Please raise your hand. There may be 3 people who don't know my wife's name. Now, isn't there something wrong with this picture where nobody knows the name of the person who put a lie in the president's mouth in the most important speech a president gives in any year, but particularly important in this year when it was a call to arms to take this country to war? But everybody knows the name of a covert CIA officer for one reason and one reason alone, because she happens to be married to me. The facts of the matter are very clear, and it's a very simple case. The President of the United States lied in the justification for taking America to war. And when Joe Wilson called him on his lie, his administration decided that they would cover up, they would obstruct, they would justify by attacking Wilson rather than acknowledging the truth, to maintain the fiction. And that's where we are now. And it is played out in the political realm. And it's a great disservice to the country. It was a 3-day story. They acknowledged on the second day that they should never have said the 16 words. If they had just stuck with that acknowledgement, and 3 days after that just said to the press, the president has moved on, the press would have moved on as well, because the press was in no mood to challenge the president then. But they could not help themselves. They couldn't help themselves because Karl Rove was running around the White House saying Wilson's a Democrat, as if being a Democrat was like being a cockroach that was worthy of being stepped on. And to this day, Eddie Enron Gillespie and Ken Mellman have airbrushed from my curriculum vitae the fact that my one political appointment as ambassador was in the administration of George Herbert Walker Bush. And if you read the RNC stuff, it's so Democrat, partisan Democrat hack, that sort of crap. That's the narrative that they tried to create. And they tried to create it because they just simply refuse to accept responsibility for their actions. If there's a lesson in what Valerie and I have been through over the past 4.5 years, and make no mistake about it, however bad it has been, for us, it has really been mere inconvenience compared to what this country has done, what this administration has done to our country, and in particular, what this administration has done to our military and to their families. These Republicans decided that they would put their loyalty to a failed president, a failed presidency, and a failed foreign policy above the troops. It's as simple as that. The example, though, that we would hope that our experience leaves for people is this. A democracy is only as strong as the participation of its citizens. We participated. We have to participate. Thomas Jefferson once said, "I have nothing to fear from the people." In fact, what he also said was, when a people is scared of its government, that is tyranny. When the government is frightened of the people, that is democracy. Let us make our government frightened of us. Thank you very much.